Hey everyone. In this video, we are going to be configuring BYOD with device registration, and then secure wireless with ETLS native supplicant provisioning. So to get started, we need to go to our Meraki dashboard, and we're going to navigate to SSIDs. As you can see here, I have an ICE secure SSID and a BYOD onboarding. First thing we need to do is configure our secure SSID, so let's go to Edit Settings. As you can see here, we have WPA2 Enterprise with my Radius server selected. We have WPA2 only encryption. And then we're using Cisco Identity Services Engine ICE authentication. And then we have the Radius server information populated here. Make sure you have Radius COA enabled as well as accounting enabled. And then down below here, you can see we're also using the filter ID. One more setting that is definitely required is adding in the walled garden is enabled. As 10.10.1.37 is my ICE server. And if you had multiple ICE servers, you'd add multiple IPs or a range in here. And then addressing and traffic, we could either use NAT mode or bridge mode. I highly recommend using bridge mode for your secure wireless access, and then whatever VLAN it needs to be tagged to. From here, we can click Save, which I've already done. And then let's move over to our other SSID. So the way this is going to work is a client is going to connect to this BYOD onboarding SSID. They're going to log in with their Active Directory credentials. And then from there, they're going to register their device. And once registered, they will be sent through the native supplicant provisioning wizard, which will allow them to download a certificate and the SSID configuration to connect to ICE Secure. So for the BYOD onboarding SSID, we're going to configure this for Mac-based access control with no encryption. We're going to use Cisco ICE authentication again, configure our Radius server information, just the same as before. Make sure our walled garden actually matches with our Radius servers. And then also use NAT mode. We don't have to use NAT mode. You could use bridge mode as well. NAT mode is just very easy to stand up quickly. And click Save. All right, so we have our two SSIDs built. Now we need to navigate over to ICE. Okay, so to get started, we need to create our guest portal. So let's go over to Work Centers, Portals and Components. And then we're going to use this self-registered guest portal, but let's duplicate it. And this might take just a second. And the reason we're duplicating is that way we can have we create another portal if need be, and we don't have to create it from scratch. So we'll go ahead and click this self-registered guest portal. And let's rename it to BYOD onboarding. And then we have to change a couple settings. So first things first, we have this authentication method as guest portal sequence. We're going to be making another authentication identity source sequence that's just going to be Active Directory for this. But for now, we're just going to save this here. And we're also going to create another guest type from contractor to make one that's maybe employee. And then we need to change a couple other settings. So for instance, we don't need an access code. We do want an AUP, but anything that says guest, we want to get rid of. So let's go look here, make sure there's nothing there, make sure nothing's selected there. Definitely not automatically register guest devices because this is only for BYOD. And then for BYOD settings, we want to allow employees to register their personal devices and put them under the registered devices identity group. We also could add this display device ID field during registration. This will tell you the MAC address of that device while it's being registered. It can be handy, especially if you're trying to troubleshoot something. Aside from that, we could scroll through here. If we wanted to do posture compliance, we could require guest device compliance, but we're not going to do that. Everything else we can pretty much leave alone, and let's click Save. And as I mentioned, we are going to change or add another authentication method, and we'll come back in here and modify that here shortly. So we're going to go over to Administration, and then Identity Source Sequences. And then let's click Add. We'll call this Active Directory. And then we're just going to choose the Active Directory domain that we've joined. So let's click Submit. Okay, so now that that's done, let's go back over to our portal. And let's do one more thing and create another guest type. So we click create here. Let's call this employee. Let's look through here. So we could say account duration starts from first log on. We'll just say that that's fine. Maximum account duration. This is not really relevant for here. Maximum simultaneous logons. So one of the things we can do is we can say that, maybe we only want to have 3 devices connected from this user at the same time, maybe just 2. I'm going to leave this, I'm going to put this to 5. And then maximum devices a guest can register is 5. And then let's see. From there, let's make sure there's nothing else we need to select here. And click save. Okay, now let's go back to our guest portal and go to BYOD onboarding. And just change a couple portal settings. So instead of guest portal sequence, we want to use Active Directory. And employees using this portal as guests inherit login options from employee. All right, now from here, let's click save. This should save here in just a second. Now we can go in and we can customize this portal. Right now, it is customized out with some example configurations. Let's change this to BYOD, this content to employee login. And then from here, let's just say Active Directory username. And you can see over here on the right, it's changing as we're updating our information. Instead of saying welcome to guest portal, let's change this to welcome to the BYOD onboarding portal. That's pretty much it. We don't really need to go through. We can go through a lot of other stuff here, but just for the sake of length for this video recording, I prefer not to change as many settings as we could. So once we've clicked save here, the server has responded that it is saved successfully. We can go over and start configuring the rest of our server. Okay, so keep in mind there's a couple things we're going to be doing. We have to configure a couple authorization policies. We also have to configure a certificate template for these users and for their devices. We also need to configure client provisioning portions. So this video is going to be quite lengthy because we are going to be configuring a number of elements. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to configure our wireless policy set. And we're going to add a new authorization rule above. And we're going to call this BYOD redirect. And if any and condition, and we just want to make a condition that matches the SSID that the user is coming from, because we want to just redirect anything that connects to this SSID. So we'll do called station ID. Instead of equals, let's use ends with. This makes sure that we're matching whatever the called station ID is. Usually it's colon SSID, so we just want to just match that SSID. And then let's add an authorization permission, which actually we're going to need to create a new one. So let's go ahead and leave this as permit access for the time being. So as you can see here, we have our BYOD redirect. This is not the correct permission. So we're going to go to policy elements and results. And we're going to create a new authorization profile. Click add. Call this BYOD redirect. And then let's scroll down here to web redirection, centralized web auth. We can call this just guest. And then the value is BYOD onboarding. Now, if we don't have DNS set up properly, which in my lab, this might not be set up because the server, my old server did die, so we're just going to go ahead and click to use a static IP address. However, in a typical environment, you'd want to have this be a fully qualified domain name, pointing to your server or pointing to like guest dot, domain. That way, it makes sense when the user gets redirected there. So let's click submit. Now if we go back to policy sets, and then wireless, and then here, Let's change this guy over to somewhere in my list. Oh, at the very top. BYOD redirect. And click Save. All right, so now when a user connects to the SSID, they're going to get redirected to this onboarding page. So we can go ahead and test this now. The settings. I'm currently connected. Let's just disconnect real quick. All right, reconnected. Let's go to unencrypted page, click connect. All right, now we have a link for our Active Directory username and password. We do not want to do this yet because we do not have anything else set up. So at least now we know that the redirect is working properly. So let's go back in here. So the next step is going to be creating the client provisioning information that will happen after this user has authenticated here. So we need to go to Policy and Client Provisioning. Now we're not going to add anything in here yet because we do need to create a new client provisioning policy, but we need to create some native supplicant provisioning information. So first things first, we need to create a certificate template. So we go to Administration and Certificates. Now, as you can see here, we have quite a few different selections, but let's go down to Certificate Authority and Certificate Templates and click Add. We're going to call this BYOD Organizational Unit. This is an easy way to key off of this certificate and provide different access based on how the certificate, where the certificate came from. So let's just call this BYOD. Let's just go through and fill this out. RSA 2048. We want to use the ICE internal CA, and then validity period. So we can make it really long, or we can make it short. So validity period could be just for a year. Like if you guys have a policy that says, hey, you can bring a BYOD device in for a year, and every year you need to redo your certificate, go for it. So let's set that to 365 and click Submit. Now we have our BYOD template, and we need to create a couple more things. So let's go to Policy, Policy Elements, and Results, and go over to Client Provisioning and Resources. From here, we're going to click Add, and we're going to add a native supplicant profile. Let's call this ICE Secure. And now from here, we can add in a couple different things. We can also specify the operating system this is built for. We can just use all for now. You can build these out to be different per operating system, depending on your situation. You can use all typically, and it works fairly well. So from here, we need to add an SSID config. So let's do the SSID name, call it ICE Secure. This has to be the SSID exactly. It cannot be anything different, or the client will not connect. Next part we're going to do is we could do WPA2 Enterprise or WPA Enterprise. Highly recommend WPA2. WPA a little bit dated, and then use TLS. Now we have certificate templates we can choose from. Let's choose our BYOD template we created earlier. And we have some optional settings. So from a Windows perspective, we could choose to use user or computer as our authentication mode. That should be fine. Let's go ahead and not prompt the user to authorize a new server or trust the server or trust the certification authorities for this SSID, because we are pushing the certificate chain down, and they should be able to trust that certificate. And then we want to connect even if the network's not broadcasting. And then from an iOS perspective, enable if the target network is hidden, just in case the SSID needs to be hidden down the road. And click Save. Now, if we were pushing out a wired supplicant configuration, we could also choose wired profile here and add that as TLS and use the same certificate information and set a lot of this from a Windows machine perspective. However, we're not going to set that today. This is just for wireless. So let's click Submit. Okay, so now we've created our supplicant provisioning wizard, which is somewhere in here. A lot of stuff in here, so I might... This will be easier to find anyway when we go into the other menu. So let's go ahead and go to Policy and Client Provisioning. Let's insert a new policy above. We're going to call this just iOS devices. You're going to want to create one per device type. So from here, we're going to select if any, and then let's select the operating system. We're going to choose Apple iOS All and condition. So we can set some conditions here. For instance, we could set that the user external group needs to be a certain group, like let's say domain users, or maybe it's more specific. Maybe you create a security group within Active Directory that that's just called BYOD, where when people have completed a form they fill out, they get their user account moved to the BYOD group and then are allowed to provision their device. Now we need to choose a provisioning wizard. So we just created this ICE Secure native supplicant provisioning profile, so let's choose that and click Save. Now keep in mind, we're going to be installing a certificate on the iPad that I have here, and then we're going to be re-authenticating to the ICE Secure SSID. So we need to create a couple more things. So let's go over to Policy and Policy Sets. We go to Wireless. And then above the BYOD redirect, we want to insert a new rule above. We're going to call this BYOD ICE Secure. Now, this device should be registered, so we're going to choose any endpoint device, registered devices. Then we're going to create a couple conditions. So the first condition we're going to create is going to be, let's see, first off, let's go with certificate. So if you remember, we created in the OU, we called it BYOD. So if we do somewhere in here, issuer, let's see, subject, organizational unit equals BYOD, or we could just say contains, and add an attribute value. This should, with certificate subject name, should state this is EAP-TLS and all that. But just to be safe, let's choose network access EAP authentication equals EAP-TLS. Let's also make sure that this is only going to match if it's coming from the ICE Secure SSID. So let's do radius called station ID equal, or not equals, but ends with ICE radius. And let's see here. So we're saying that if the certificate contains BYOD and it is an EAP-TLS authentication and it's coming from the ICE radius SSID, then we want to do something. So in this case, let's first mark this as permit access. However, we do want to give different privileges based on, if it's a BYOD device, we probably don't want to allow them access to our internal network, or all of our internal network, I should say. So let's go back over to our Meraki dashboard, and let's navigate to network-wide and group policies. From here, we have a couple different things. I've got one pre-created called BYOD access. So let's look at what happens here. So with BYOD access, we're permitting a couple things, such as access to, for instance, my Active Directory server, and then permissions to ICE, the ICE portal for authentication. And 8443 is good to permit for any redirects as well. So anytime that client connects and maybe we blacklist their device, it's going to be redirected to port 8443 in a portal. So you can permit that. But we're going to deny all the rest of the 10.address space just from a testing perspective, and maybe deny a couple firewall or a couple other applications with the layer 7 firewall rules with like peer-to-peer and all peer-to-peer traffic. We could also do a couple other things, like we could add a new shaping rule, and maybe we want to allow people to watch videos and listen to music, but maybe we want to choose a limit and limit their access down to a megabit per second. And let's mark this as lowest priority. And let's choose something really boring. such as CS8, or CS1, I mean. And click Save. So now we need to create an authorization permission that allows us to push this filter ID back that will tie this BYOD access group policy to that user when they authenticate. So let's go into Policy and Results. And then let's go to Authorization, Authorization Profiles, Add. Let's call this BYOD Access. And then all we're going to do is scroll down. Never mind, we'll use this drop down here. Let's just use radius. We could type filter. Let's see if we can find the filter ID. Filter ID equals BYOD access. And click Submit. All right, now let's navigate back over to policy sets real quick. Let's go to wireless. Instead of permit access, let's go down to, or up to, BYOD access. And click Save. Now I have a user pre-created called user1 that we're going to use to test. So let's go ahead and start by, let me pull up my iPad here. Let's go to BYOD onboarding. Now that I've connected, let's go ahead and open up the browser. And browse to msn.com or any unsecured wireless. In my username, type in my password, and then agree and sign on. And let's click Start. Now at this point, we're going to be registering our device, so we're going to type iPad. And then we're going to launch the Apple Profile Installer. So this is going to install the certificates, such as my root CA certificate. And click Install, and Install. Then we're going to click Done, and it's going to bring up now another installer. Now this is going to go through and this is going to install our profile. So from here it's going to generate a couple keys for authentication. As you can see right now it says Profile Service. And then we're going to see it change over to ICE-Secure as the next, and it says Generating Key there. And once it's done generating that key, we're going to go ahead and click Connect here in just a second. So now that that profile is done installing, it should say Success. You can now close your browser and reconnect to ICE Secure. One thing I just noticed, however, is that we have the wrong, where is it? Radius called station ID ends with, it says ICE Radius. Our SSID is actually ICE Secure. So when we click to connect here on the iPad, we should see that when I connect to ICE Secure, it's going to fail and say unable to join. Now, if we browse over to Radius and Live Logs, we're going to see here that I failed to authenticate. And if we click on this and dive into it, we're going to see rejected per authorization rule, blah, blah, blah. More or less, we matched the deny access at the end of the rule. So we need to go back in here, and we need to go back to Policy and Policy Sets, Wireless. And we need to change this to say ICE Secure, not ICE Radius, and click Save. And once this does finally save, let's pull up my iPad again, and let's try to connect to ICE Secure. All right, and it looks like it's authenticating, and we have an IP address of 10.10.0.108. Let's go to Operation and Live Logs. Now we can see we passed authentication. Now let's click on this and just double check a couple of things. So, as you can see, we match the wireless .1x default, wireless BYOD ICE Secure. We can see all of the information, such as my username. We can also see that my device is now considered registered. As you can see, endpoint identity group is registered devices. And we can also see that, let's scroll to, what part am I looking for? We returned a radius access accept, and there is also a filter ID we responded with as well, right here for BYOD access. So now let's pop back over to our dashboard. So let's go to network wide and clients. And we can see my iPad here. We can see that I'm connected to ICE Secure. We can also see that I have the .1x policy of BYOD access. So if we click on this now, we should see that we are permitting access to, for instance, the Active Directory server. So let's go ahead and open up. It is running a web server. So let's go to 10.10.1.20. Click go. So we should have access to IIS there. However, let's try to get to the ICE administration portal, which is not on port 8443. Let's just click go. As you can see, we cannot open the page. If we try to even change this over to https:// and click go. Oops, we definitely didn't want that 8443 there. It's not proving a point. So let's put in the 7, go. Oh, golly. You know, autocorrect is really irritating. Let's just try another one. So I have a WLC. So let's try https://10.10.1.30. Now, as you can see, I can't get to that from my iPad. However, if I go to my browser here, I'm able to browse to my wireless LAN controller, and everything works. So just as a recap real quick, let's go over a couple things. So we started out by creating not only the SSIDs that we needed, which would be these two SSIDs right here, ICE Secure and BYOD onboarding. We also created a group policy in Dashboard called BYOD access that gives only a limited amount of access and a limited amount of bandwidth for that user. And then if we go under ICE, we created a couple of things. So let's go to our policy sets and wireless. As you can see here, we created 2 rules. One of them is the BYOD redirect that allows anything that's connecting to BYOD onboarding to get redirected to the BYOD onboarding portal. And then from there, once they've enrolled themselves through the client provisioning configuration that we created, they will then be able to get BYOD access as long as they've registered their device and they're authenticating with EAP-TLS. As well as the certificate has to contain BYOD. This can make sure that we don't match any other rules accidentally with users that should be able to have different types of access. Such as if we had internal devices that were given certificates from our Microsoft CA, we might not want them to get this BYOD access. We might want to give them different access, which we could do in many different ways, but one way is to match based on information inside that certificate. So anyway, I hope this was informative for you, and I thank you for viewing.